It's a beautiful way to, again, be collaborative within our families and with our children, and to have this open and honest communication. I'm asking you to do this because as a family, we value X. I'm asking you to not do this because as a family, we value X and this is out of alignment. And it doesn't feel good when we're out of alignment with our values. And what a compass, I think, to offer our children as they grow up and they develop and they build skills and they are sort of on their way to making it out into the world.
Rachel Poirier is our guest today. She's a parent coach and school consultant with expertise in executive functioning, twice exceptionality, and neurodiverse learners. In a previous episode, she discussed parenting with curious optimism. This is a follow-up to that discussion in which Rachel talks about family values, how they can help guide expectations for parents and kids, and ways to develop them within your household.
I think this conversation about family values is a really nice segue from talking about curiosity because I think that in order to become clear on what we value as a family, step one of that is to get curious, right? Like, what does it mean for us within our family to either work as a team, to be a good human? And again, I put that in quotes because it's going to look different for every family or will look different between families, and that's okay. It may not look like how we were raised. It may not look like how our neighbors are raising their children, and that's okay. So being curious and really intentional about what we want to cultivate within our family is, I think, a really nice first step to developing these family values. Because ultimately, culture will develop within our families, whether we plan for it or not. So getting intentional about what it is that we want to nurture and grow and develop can really help to clarify some of the why and the how, excuse me, of our parenting, and why we set the rules and expectations that we do, how we choose to spend our time together. And when it is with this sort of deeper aim of relating to family values, it can be it can be really transformative for our children and for our families.
Yeah, you used the word deep. It seems like this is a deep process. I don't know how many, with the families that you work with, how many families are um, kind of aware of what their values are versus how many have really never thought about it. And then maybe you could just offer some examples when you say family values,
Mhm.
some of the values that your clients have identified that they want to demonstrate and model and respect at home.
Yeah, to your first question, I think generally in my experience, I find that all families have a sort of a sense of what they want to cultivate. And many families haven't made it explicit, if that makes sense. So we go about our lives as parents and we maybe I'm kind of making up generic examples, but we would say we want our children to be kind and we want them to be honest, and we want them to be self-sufficient or whatever the case may be. And we know that sort of in our hearts and our minds. And oftentimes we don't make that explicit to our children and say, because we value self-sufficiency, we're asking you to get yourself up on time, to set your alarm, and to go through your morning routine, right? And of course, this is all age dependent on our children. Um, and I think, it can really be an aha moment for parents and for families when we link what we're asking of our children to kind of core attributes of being good people in this world. And it can provide so much clarity um about what we're asking them to do and why and when. And some families find, gosh, I'm asking my kids to do this, or I'm setting this expectation, but actually I'm just doing it really reflexively because that's what my parents asked of me, and ultimately it doesn't serve this greater purpose of aligning with our family's values. So it can be really insightful to intentionally have these conversations with our partners in parenting, to identify these values and then develop expectations for behavior, and for actions that align with the values. And I think it becomes then so clear to our children, particularly over the years, that, oh, right, I have these chores and they're kind of a drag, and I know why. They might not agree, with this value initially of self-sufficiency or autonomy, whatever the case may be. And it can sort of answer the question that comes up in so many families. Why do I have to do this? Why are we doing this? Why are we having family dinner? Why can't I go spend the night at my friend's house? Well, because, here's maybe an example of a value. We're a team. We value spending time together as a family. We value connection with one another. And how that translates to action is that every Saturday night is movie night. I'm making this up. This is arbitrary, but this can be a response to the question, why can't I miss dinner tonight and go to my friend's house? Why I have all this studying to do. Why can't I have dinner in my room? Well, because this is sort of what we hang our hat on as a family. And that doesn't mean there's not room for flexibility, but it means that the undercurrent that really inspires us to set the rules and the limits and the expectations that we do come from this place of intentionality
You're
to
an-
serve a bigger purpose.
you're anchoring yourself to something real and something
Yes.
meaningful rather than
Mhm.
just whatever comes to mind or whatever happened in your work day or whatever happened in your personal life and reacting without any real justification or any meaning behind that. You explained that really well. Um,
Mhm.
how do you work with families to identify those values?
Yeah, there's a process that I invite families to participate in. And in fact, I would like to offer this resource to your listeners. So it's a family values workbook that will take listeners through just a few questions, but they're meaty questions. But sort of following this process of chatting potentially with a spouse or a parenting partner, and really setting some time aside to take a dive into these questions and into considering what it is that we expect, why we expect it, and exactly to your point, Andrew, what are we anchoring to sort of for something bigger? And that can sort of funnel us down into the day to day and how we behave and what we ask of our children. And you know, conversely, or along the same lines, what our children can ask of us, right, in return. Um, and I think it's a beautiful way to, again, be collaborative within our families and with our children, and to have this open and honest communication. I'm asking you to do this because as a family, we value X. I'm asking you to not do this because as a family, we value X and this is out of alignment. And it doesn't feel good when we're out of alignment with our values. And what a compass, I think, to offer our children as they grow up and they develop and they build skills and they are sort of on their way to making it out into the world. And I want to add too that it's never too late to do this or to begin this process. So for any parents that are thinking, oh my gosh, I blew it. My kids are teenagers and we haven't had this conversation. No, it's never too late. It's never too late.
So we'll include that workbook, the link to that workbook in the show notes. And I think you have one for curiosity, curious
Mhm.
optimism as well. We'll put them both in there.
Perfect.
But it seems like this approach provides the reason, answers the why. And then as you pointed out, it gives the parents, but also the children, the language or vocabulary to use, even maybe with holding their own parents accountable if they're working outside the family values. You work with parents all the time on these kinds of things, and are there other questions that often come up, or some problems that you see that you want to offer a little bit of additional guidance to? navigating?
Yeah, I think generally it's so productive for families to engage in this family values exercise. And I think I I don't so much see problems cropping up as I see these insights that maybe would have come later on parents' journeys, or maybe would have been tricky to come by without this container of family values. And I think a lot of aha moments that I observe are related to, oh, well, I was just doing this because I sort of felt like I had to. I felt pressure to kind of set this expectation or conform in this way. Or, well, this is what we did in my family when I was their age. So that's just what we're doing. And actually, it doesn't serve my child at this point in their development. That doesn't mean that we have to make huge sweeping changes, or that we have to sort of jettison our learning histories and our experiences. But what it does mean is that we can remain open to crafting what works for our families at any given moment in time. And we can have a core value that grows with our families and with our children, that sort of looks different as they get older, right? So maybe, independence or self-sufficiency or autonomy, whatever word we want to insert, looks different for a 4-year-old than it does for a 14-year-old. And yet, that same attribute or quality can be so deeply important across the lifespan, or across the childhood, as our children are growing and developing. So I think within the framework, there's room for our values to grow and expand as our children grow and develop. And I think it's worth mentioning again that I also love the family values framework because it offers us sort of a springboard to skill building. So if we're seeing that our children are struggling with maybe a morning routine or an evening routine, or struggling with completing homework, or whatever the case may be, we can identify why this is important for us and anchor it to a family value, and then have inroads to building that skill, because this is what we value as a family. And ultimately, we know that it's going to serve our children in the long run. And I think, too, it's important to say, when when parents are sort of bringing this topic to their children, it's okay for us to kind of drive that conversation. And a lot of the pre-work has to do with us as parents getting clear on what it is that we want to grow and cultivate. So sort of doing that work before we bring it to our children. And certainly, and the older the children, the more input I think can be invited, and the more collaboration will be appreciated, particularly with our tweens and teens. And having said that, it's still okay for us to kind of have the guidelines in our mind, and for us to sort of be clear on, these are the top 3 things, these are the top 5 things that we really want to focus on.
Yeah, that sounds like this process would be so transformative for the family, but also for the parent, for anybody. I mean, who really dives down into what the personal values are. And then, as you said, you're actually, by doing this, you're scaffolding your child in a lifelong process of continually reviewing and modifying personal values so that you have kind of a code to live by rather than just, blowing in the wind, or just, you don't have any sort of, like you said, a compass to come back to steer you. And then something else you said that was really interesting is this allows parents to think about what areas of challenge or skill deficits or whatever to push on, and which ones just to back off and let it go. Because we hear so often, well, when do I, what is important? When do I push? When do I, kind of push my child to do something they're uncomfortable with? When do I just let it go?
Mm.
But it sounds like if you have those values, you can come back and measure those against those values, and it gives you some idea of, this is worth pursuing. This is worth just letting go because it doesn't really mean anything.
I love that. Yep, I love that. And I think you summarized it beautifully. And it also, I think, allows us the flexibility to define what these qualities look like, again, at different ages. And you know what? I can come back to this later. It doesn't mean it's any less of a value. Or I'm going to modify how I teach it or how it can look for my child during this age and stage. And then we build from there.
This is really exciting. Yeah, that values worksheet is so cool. I encourage anybody who's listening to this to go click on the link and go work through that. It is so clarifying, so transformative, as you said. That's going to be huge. These are two really cool themes. I don't know that anybody's come on and talked about these two in any way before. So thank you for sharing this. And then I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you do professionally, what kinds of clients you work with, what you work on, and how listeners can find you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Andrew. Um, I'm a board certified behavior analyst, and ultimately, I teach parents to support their kids in more calm, confident, and connected ways. And I help kids grow their social, emotional, and academic skills. And my expertise really is in executive functioning, so that's a big focus of my work. And folks can find me on my website. I also have a monthly newsletter.
And go ahead, what is your website? And I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, thanks. It's peartreebx.com. Pear like the fruit, peartreebx.com.
And why did you pick the name Pear Tree?
My last name, Poirier, means pear tree in French.
And
Poirier is
then
French for pear tree.
that's awesome. Yeah, when we last talked, I thought that was so cool. And then do you work with clients virtually and in person? Because you're in Glenwood Springs, but
Mm.
what geographically do they need to be right there in your office, or how does that work?
They do not need to be right in my office. I am based in Glenwood Springs, and I do work virtually with clients all over the world.
I your information you shared was so interesting. I was just trying to keep my mouth shut and just let you talk, and but it was great, and would love to have you on in the future to talk about either to go more in depth on these issues or share some of the other issues and techniques you work with your family. So, thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew. I would love that. I look forward to chatting with you again.
That's it from us today. As always, you can find more information as well as resources on our website, individualmatters.org. We hope you'll join us at the next podcast, where we'll continue to explore topics around successful living, learning and education, and child development, and share ways to help you live a more positive and fulfilling life.
The preceding information is not intended to provide or serve as medical, clinical, or educational advice. Individual Matters is not responsible for the accuracy of guest statements. All information should be validated independently. Please consult with your doctor, mental health provider, attorney, or other appropriate professionals before making any personal decisions for yourself or those in your care.